A wide variety of fabrics that are available in the market today are used for making garments. Mainly fabrics such as woven, knitted, laminated or laced fabrics. These are used for making the garments. Actually, while selecting the fabric for making the garment, and we have to look into some of the aspects and we have to see that it is flawless. If there are any flaws in the fabric, then that will be reflected in the garment again, and the distortion that is seen in the fabric is again appear in the fabric, and thus making it unsightly, and also the quality will come down. And so, one has to be very careful while buying or purchasing the fabric for making the garments. And also one thing to see is that the fabric should have even width. If the width is uneven along its length, then it will be a problem while cutting the garment parts and then attaching them. Some will become smaller and some may become bigger, and so there will be some distortion. And not only that, if the threads are not properly made, and then the fall of the garment also will be affected. And so, in order to augment its appearance as well as its fall, the fabric should be really flawless, and at the same time sometimes it may require some preparation before it is being stitched into a garment. Since many woven fabrics are being used for making garments, it is better to know some of the basic terms that are being used in the fabrics. For example, you have selvage. Selvage, or it is also called selvage, it is the self edge of the fabric which is there on either side of the fabric. When we take the fabric, we can see that there are two thicker edges that are running along the length of the fabric, and usually the fabric is measured along one of the lines and then the fabric is being cut. But this edge, sometimes in order to make it more stronger, and more number of yarns are being placed over there, warp yarns, so that this becomes little thicker when compared to other fabrics, and also it will be very strong, so that even if you want to tear it, it is not possible to tear the fabric as such. For fabrics that are made into garments, usually 1.25 centimeters or 1 centimeter selvage will be present. Maybe for bed sheets and all, you may find it as a tape selvage, which is a little wider than the ones that are being used for the apparels. And then we have two sets of yarns that are present in the woven fabrics. They are called as the warp and the weft yarns. Warp yarns are the yarns that run parallel to the selvages. So, while the fabric is made on the loom, you find that these warp yarns are placed on the loom from one end to another end. So, they are under tension. Some of these yarns are raised and lowered as per the design, as per the weave of the fabric, and then it will form a shed in between through which the weft yarn passes, and thus it interlaces. The weft yarn interlaces with the warp. The warp yarns are always under tension. And so, usually these warp yarns, which are also called as ends, these are made little stronger by using ply yarns. Instead of having one yarn, two yarns are wound together or twisted together to form a yarn which is little stronger, and it can withstand the strain during the weaving. And then coming to the weft yarn. For example, if the weft yarn is ordinary, then it will be a single yarn usually, unless it is a 2 by 2 and other materials where it is again a ply yarn. Otherwise, in all ordinary fabrics, usually you find it being a single yarn. And if any thick yarns are to be used, for in the case of some design effects in the fabric, then you find that these yarns which are thicker will always be weft and not the warp. For example, some loops are there and some kind of slubs, knotted portions and other things are there. They are always used in the weft, and so weft need not be that stronger when compared to the warp. These are the two sets of yarns that are very, very important in woven fabric, and they should be woven or interlaced in such a way that they form exactly right angles to each other. That means, they should make 90 degrees to each other, so that the fabric is going to be a perfect one. Then coming to the grain, off grain or on grain, these are the terms which are being used by many people that are involved in garment making. And grain is nothing but it is the direction of the warp and weft, how they are, whether they are right angle to each other or there is any difference in the right angle. They are little slack or a little one side or a little the other side, because it is not, they are not just right angle to each other. In that case, the grain forms very important aspect. Usually on grain, we say on grain, sometimes it is also referred to the straight grain, wherein in the garment patterns are being marked with a parallel line, and that means that that particular pattern piece should be placed on the fabric parallel to the selvage, that is the on grain. Otherwise, the warp and weft should be right angle to each other, then only we can call it as on grain. That means that the fabric is flawless, it is easier to make garments without any problem, and the fabrics will also have very good fall. Whereas, in case of any disparity in the 90 degrees, that is in the right angle, then there is a problem. You say for example, they are not making 90 degrees, they are making only say 80 degrees, 70 degrees, 60 degrees, like that. What happens is the yarns are not straight onto the fabric. That means warp yarns are usually straight, but the weft yarns are all not inserted straight, then only the problem comes. Whenever you subject it to for any finishing and other things, usually it happens in finishing that they are not finished properly and they are not fed into the finishing machinery properly, so that the right angle yarns will not be formed. Then in that case, we need to prepare them, we need to straighten them. So, when you find those yarns which are not right angle together to the warp yarns, then we call it as off grain. So, off grain is always a problem in the garments, and the garments, when you make them by using this kind of fabrics, then you find that there is a distortion and in every place, and you may find unwanted wrinkles here and there, and the fall will have definitely a lower degree. And so, we have to be careful to see that the garments are always on grain. The importance of the grain should be understood properly, and the advantages of the grain should be utilized for making garments. Garments that are going to have very good fit, very good hang and durability, and also the proper lines. For example, when you take gathers and also the pleats, when they are made in the fabric lengthwise, they are going to have very good fall. They stand just like that. Even if you iron it or not also, they fold into a graceful folds, and then it hangs very well. But in case if you use crosswise grain, then in that case the folds will not appear properly, and unless you iron those things at the particular point, then only you will find that the folds are proper. And once the effect of ironing is over, then again it will become unsightly. And so, importance of the grain should be understood, and also the person who is stitching should also understand that the warp threads are stronger in fabric, and so whenever length of the garment should always be taking the warp yarns becoming right angle to the floor, or it is parallel to the length of the person who is wearing that particular garment. The crosswise thread should always be crosswise. Say for example, it is parallel to the floor or parallel to the full width of the fullest part of the hip or at the bust line, and it should be crosswise. And crosswise also has better stretchability when compared to the warpwise, and thus the comfort will be there. Basically the grain means it is to have the fabric which hangs well and which looks well, and also having all the lines that fall in a proper way, and thus the final fit, also the final look of the garment is being finished very neatly, and it can be presented, and also it augments the quality of the fabric. And so, these are the things that we have to look into, and so the grain should be taken care of in the garment construction. There is one more term that we use here is the bias. Bias is actually, it is the diagonal of a perfect square if it is a true bias. True bias means it makes a 45 degrees angle to the garment, that means it is a diagonal of a perfect square. If it is not a true bias, that means that it is the direction between the warp yarn and the weft yarn, it is in between. Okay. And so, it is the diagonal direction. We said that the warp and weft make right angle to each other, and so when you have a diagonal line, and so that part of it is called as the bias. So, true bias is required, in order to make it more stretchable. The outstanding quality of the bias material is that it has a very good stretchability. It stretches more, when compared to either warp or the weft. And so, when a fabric is given to you, and if they say that if they do not show either warp or the weft, when you stretch it, you will be able to identify that it is a bias material, just because it has higher stretch. And so, this quality of the fabric is being utilized to finish the curved edges, like we have necklines, some armholes, and wherever there is a curve in the garment, in order to finish that particular thing, true bias is being used. But you find that most of the tailors and other people do not use exactly bias garment. So, the necklines and all, the finish will not be very correct, and you find that there are small unwanted wrinkles being seen. That is because the true bias is not being used. If it does not make a true bias, then if the garment or the piece, the piece of fabric, if it is cut between the warp and the bias, or between the weft and the bias, any line between these two, that means that it does not make 45 degrees angle, then the fabric is called garment bias. So, garment bias will not give full stretchability, and thus where curves are very deep, in that case it does not give a proper fit and proper finish, and so it does not look nice, and it forms all the unwanted wrinkles over there. And so, while cutting the fabric, especially for finishing and all, finishing of these curved edges and all, we have to go for the bias. And so, these are some of the terms that are being used, for making the garments. Then let us see how we prepare the fabrics for cutting. Whenever we purchase a fabric, we should always look into the fabric, how it is, what's its appearance, whether it has a good color and uniform color, or whether the fabric is properly made, and whether the yarns are closer together or not. So, once you buy the fabric and bring it, we have to always check it. Sometimes you find that there may be thicker yarns, running along one of the lengths or the width side, or you may find threads hanging from the fabric, or it may be seeing the knotted yarns over there, or uneven color and uneven yarns. All these things you may find in the fabric. Printed fabrics, if you take, misprints will be seen. So, if you find these fabrics, it is better to avoid. Otherwise, if you have to make it into a garment, then what you have to do is you mark them that these are the problems, and see that these are avoided while putting the the garment pattern pieces on that and cutting it. So, if these are avoided, there may not be any problem, but if these are there and it comes onto the garment and it becomes unsightly, or sometimes it may even lessen the durability of the fabric or bring down the quality of the fabric. So, these are the things that we have to look into first. And then whenever you get the fabric, it may be around 1 meter, 2 meters or 3 meters, and whichever is your requirement, you will buy the material and get it. Sometimes the salesman may not cut the edges properly. Then the first step in making it ready for cutting is to make the edges even. So, in order to make the edges even, please see whether fabric is being cut on a one thread or not. When you ravel out one thread from the edges, you can find that it is actually the edge is even or not. Then in case of firm fabrics, very firm fabrics will be there, and where there are a lot of thread count, that means both warp yarns and weft yarns are more. In that fabric, it is very firm. Then you can see along the line, one of the lines, and then cut off and then make it even. But sometimes some fabrics like chiffons, georgettes and crepes and all silk fabrics also. It is difficult to see it. And so, like cottons and all, if it is formed, you can just clip it at the selvage and then tear it. Tearing of the fabric is the best for them to make the edges even, but for some of these delicate fabrics, we cannot tear it and make it unsightly, because the yarns will not tear easily, and so it will be pulling out the edges, the yarns on either side, and thus it becomes unsightly. So, it is always better to clip the edge, because it is a selvage which is thicker. So, clip the selvage and take out one yarn and try to remove the yarn, travel that yarn and gently by taking the pulling that particular thing and also evening the other fabric, and thus you can remove one yarn from it, and thus there will be a path now seen along which you can cut the material and make the edges even. Then after evening the edges, then what you have to do? You have to see whether they are making right angle to each other or not. So, in order to see that, we have to place the fabric on the table, and by folding the two selvages together like this, one selvage over the other, and then see the both the sides edges. If the edges come one over the other, then it is right angle to each other. If it does not come, then it is off grain. Then you have to look into that, how make the threads right angle to each other. For some fabrics, just a simple straightening the fabric is enough, because sometimes maybe due to some finishing or some defect, the yarns are not right angle to each other and the edges are not together. In that case, what we can do is place the fabric straight on the table, and then try to pull the fabric along the true bias lines. And we learned that bias has a very good stretchability, and so pull the fabric in one bias line and leaving 2-3 inches, and then again pull the fabric along this bias line again 2 inches, like that, till the end of the fabric on either side. We have to pull the fabric and then see whether it is the edges are again forming one above the other. Usually some firm fabrics and all, it comes out very well, and with the simple stretching, while stretching, you stretch and then leave it for a few seconds, and then go to the next place, and then you will stretch it and do it. And so, like that, you can straighten. This is just a simple method of straightening the fabric. But if it does not stand again, that means if it does not come one above the other, that means that the yarns are not right angle to each other. Then what are we going to do? Then mostly it happens due to the finishing in the fabrics, whereas the fabric is being scoured and bleached, and sometimes it is given starch finish, and also it goes to the stenter, and then it is calendered. So, when it comes to the consumer, when we buy the fabric, sometimes the yarns are not right angle. So, this happens only during the finishing, and in that case we may have to look some other methods of making them straight. And for some fabrics where we cannot actually wash them or immerse them into water, then one method you can follow, that is steam press method. In that case, what we have to do is that you fold the fabric lengthwise, so that the selvages, one selvage is on the other one, and also both the edges on the side, the first edge on the other side and the rear side, these two edges also. We have to base them with a thread like that, one above the other, like that, and one above the one selvage over the other selvage, like this. You have to baste along the 3 edges. The fourth edge is this side, which is a folded edge, is left like that. And so, after basting them like this, then either you sprinkle water. If you do not have a steam press, then we can sprinkle water, and then with a hot iron we try to make them straightened along the bias lines. You can stretch it and then draw it and press it, so that it becomes all right, or otherwise sometimes you can use even the steam press. So, steam press will also give the steam, otherwise the sprinkled water, due to hot iron, it will produce the steam over there, and thus it makes it to set at that particular stage. So, the fabric is at that stage, and thus there are no wrinkles, and the warp yarns are straight and the weft yarns are right angle to it, and also the selvage is one of the, on the other selvage the edges are also even on either side. And so, like this we can try out, this is called as a steam press method. And some of the, if it is doesn't again, if it, nothing happens to it, and if the still you find that at the folded edge there are some more wrinkles coming up, that means that the fabric is not straightened. In that case, we have to go for the immersion method. Here also the fabric should be folded half lengthwise, and see that the the selvages are coming one above the other, and the edges are also even on either side and based along the lines. And then the whole fabric is immersed in water and then left for some time, and then you squeeze out that particular material and place it over the table, and then you try to straighten out. Mostly cottons and other materials, if there is a problem like this when the finishing comes, these will be straightened by using this particular method. Very easy, that you straighten out this one, and then you dry the material, and then you steam press it, so that along the bias line, so that it stretches and gives a perfect fold over there, and also all the edges are all over one above the other, and thus it shows that the fabric is prepared properly. So, these are possible only in case of washable fabrics. So, how to actually prepare non-washable fabrics? Some of the fabrics cannot be washed, like woolens. In woolen fabric, if they are used, we cannot wash, put it in water and take it out. Sometimes the yarns come together and it becomes unsightly, and it is very difficult for you to cut it. And so, there is another method of dealing with these materials. Like these, again you have selvages for these materials. We can put them, fold the fabrics lengthwise as in case of washable fabrics, and see that the both the sides edges as well as the selvages are basted together, and then the fabric is not either sprinkled with water or not put into water, but we take a thicker like a Turkish towel or something like that, and then put it in water, immerse it in water, and then wring out the water. And so, it has only that moisture content that is present in that. So, place this fabric which is basted on all sides, 3 sides, place this fabric and into the on the wet towel, and then roll it and leave it for some 6 to 8 hours. Then when you take it out and the fabric and pull along the lines, again bias lines, and see, not pulling very gently, because woolens, if you pull little extra, then that extra line will be seen, that like pulled, and you find the creases appearing in other areas. And so, we have to be very careful with the woolen materials, and you should always put them flat, and you should never hang them, and thus we can protect its shape and sight of the fabric contour. And then coming to the fabrics which are knitted, mostly our t-shirts and all are made with the knitted fabrics. So, knitted fabrics need to be also prepared for stitching, and actually it is difficult to prepare these fabrics. And so, while selecting the fabric itself, we have to be very careful. See that here there are no warp and weft threads, but we call them as veils and courses. Veils run parallel, courses run horizontally. So, by taking one of the veil as a selvage, we have to fold the material like this and stitch the edges and all, and you can do as we have done in the case of this washable material, like sprinkling of water or using the steam press, we can iron these materials and make them straightened. But we may not be able to wash them. Washing may not also helpful in making the fabrics straight. And so, the knitted fabrics we have to be very careful, and at the same time, if you stretch the material and if it contains little wool and other materials which are not that stretch resistant, there will be a problem. The resin finished cottons, for example, they cannot be straightened, because they will be given treatment and they are also treated at a very high temperature, you cannot straighten them. So, if you find that that particular fabric is not having right angle to each other, the warp yarns and weft yarns, then avoid that material. And also the fabrics with misprint, because the fabric is not properly made, the edges are not even, in that case the print is also made in that, and so off print will come, and whenever you make it a garment, like for example a skirt, and then you find that the skirt is having only partly that particular design and the other portions are not there, and so it becomes unsightly on the fabric, and it loses the quality. And so we should not buy such kind of materials, off prints, with thick and thin threads we should not buy, and we should also not go for the fabrics which are not having even width. For example, in 1 meter of fabric, if you check at 4 or 5 points, the width of the material should be same. If the width of the material vary, again for especially for ready-made garments and all, they place the material in the form of rolls, one above the other in the layers, and then while they are cutting it, what happens is, if the width is inside and if some width is outside, then while cutting, some of the parts of the garment will lose the material. And so one has to be very careful, and the fabrics that are going to be used for the garment should not have any flaws. If the flaws are there, if they don't take care of the flaws for the raw material, and they go ahead with making of the garment, finally the garment will be rejected and it will be a loss for the garment industry. And so today they are giving lot of importance for, especially for inspection of the raw material not only fabric, but also all the garment accessories, so that the final garment quality is ensured. Another problem associated with the woven fabrics is the shrinkage. If the fabric is pre-shrunk before it comes to the market, then the size and the shape of the fabric can also, when it is made into a garment, it can be protected. Otherwise, if it is not a shrunk fabric, then the problem arises. So once the garment is made out of this fabric, and then when it is used and washed for the first time, then the size will become smaller and also shape may distort. And so it is always better to pre-shrink the fabrics. If we are going for the quality garments, then pre-shrunk fabrics are being used mostly. In case of cottons, a finish called sanforizing is being given, and so the fabrics that come out of this sanforizing finish, they are called as sanfoset fabrics or sanforized fabrics. Sanfosetting or sanfoset is a term used for rayon fabrics, that is, they are pre-shrunk fabrics. In case of woolen fabrics, London shrinkage, London shrunk means the fabric is pre-shrunk in case of wool. And in case of synthetic fabrics, actually this pre-shrinkage and other things are not there, but they are actually finished at a very high temperature, and which is equal to their transitional temperature, so that if you use any more temperature more than that, the fabric is going to distort. And so when it is set at that particular temperature, when the garment is cut and stitched, then it will not lose that particular shape. So for synthetic fabrics it is okay, but for woven fabrics of mainly cotton and rayon and also wool, they pose the problems during the wear. And so shrinkage should be taken important aspect, and so fabric should be pre-shrunk and then only used for cutting.